When Judge Mathis questioned her legal chops, Jasmine Crockett didn't fire back. She delivered a quiet, powerful reminder of what real justice looks like. The cameras were already rolling when Jasmine entered through the side door of the community auditorium in Bakersfield, California. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a half-empty water bottle in one hand and a stack of handwritten notes in the other. Her look was understated. Navy blazer, white blouse, hair pulled back, expression unreadable. She didn't come to perform. She came prepared. The event had been hyped for days. A nationally broadcast panel on police accountability hosted by a regional civic alliance. Judges, politicians, attorneys, and activists, all at one table. The kind of setting where reputations were made or undone. At the center sat Judge Greg Mathis. Years of TV courtroom banter had made him a fan favorite. Known for his wit and no-nonsense style, he opened the panel with a few jabs and laughs to warm the crowd. Then, with a sly smile, he turned toward Jasmine. "You know," he said into the mic, "some folks here talk real big in D.C., but haven't smelled a courtroom in years." Polite. Laughter rippled through the audience. Jasmine didn't react. Seated between a retired police chief and a civil rights professor, she calmly adjusted her chair and placed her notes in front of her. Mathis went on, introducing the other panelists. But when he got to her, the tone shifted. "And next, we've got Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Fresh off Capitol Hill. Former public defender, so they say." This time, the chuckle had teeth. The crowd caught the edge. So did Jasmine. She leaned into her mic, voice steady. "Good to be here, Judge. And yes, I practiced real law. In real courtrooms with real clients, daily." The air changed. The murmurs weren't just polite. Now they were paying attention. Mathis raised an eyebrow. "Well then, I guess we'll find out just how real today, won't we?" The panel moved to its first topic, qualified immunity. The moderator asked a broad question to the group, but the room was already looking at Jasmine. She let the professor beside her finish before speaking. "I've represented people whose only crime was walking home," she said. "And I've read rulings where officers walked free because the court said the law wasn't clearly established. That's what qualified immunity protects: confusion over the obvious." Her delivery was crisp, measured, no jargon, just plain speech with power behind it. A woman in the third row leaned forward. A man in a hoodie in the back raised his phone to record. Even the moderator glanced her way, surprised. But Judge Mathis wasn't moved. "Congresswoman," he said, "with all due respect, quoting cases is easy. Practicing law in the trenches, that's different. When's the last time you argued a suppression hearing?" It was a challenge, just veiled enough to pass for curiosity. Jasmine didn't blink. "State v. Drayton," she said. "Tulsa County. Officer claimed to stop for suspicious behavior. The dashcam proved otherwise." Mathis tilted his head. "Oklahoma, got it. Real specific." Jasmine nodded. "What's more interesting is what happened after. The young man got his job back, regained custody of his son. Because I didn't just argue motions, I argued for families." The applause started small, from the back. Then it rolled forward. Mathis adjusted his mic, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a back and forth anymore. The crowd was shifting, listening. He leaned in, voice low but sharp. "Well, Jasmine," he said too casually, "that's a touching story. But let's be real. TV courtrooms and real ones, not the same. Ever put a cop on the stand and make him crack under cross?" He didn't wait for an answer, because that's what separates the paper lawyers from the sharks. A few people chuckled, but it felt different now. Less confident, more divided. A few heads turned not to laugh, but to see what Jasmine would do next. The moderator cleared her throat, trying to intervene. Let's keep our focus on policy and community justice. But Judge Mathis interrupted smoothly. This is about justice, including holding politicians accountable when they act like they know what it's like, but haven't had mud on their boots in years. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her seat. She just looked at him. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply adjusted the mic and leaned in just enough for her voice to cut across the room. I was in the trenches, Judge. 5 days a week. 200 cases a year. Her tone was cool, measured, you know how. Many plea deals I turned down because I believed my clients deserved better than a system that already assumed they were guilty. She let it hang, then added, "You want cross-examinations." I've had officers lie under oath and leave the stand red-faced. A pause. Then, and unlike TV, there were no commercial breaks between that kind of pressure. The room went still. Judge Mathis lifted his hands in mock surrender, the courtroom showman in him kicking in. "All right," he said. "Now you're swinging." I like it. But Jasmine wasn't swinging. She was steady. Grounded. You want details? I'll give you one, Reggie. 17. Pulled over outside Albuquerque. The officer claimed he smelled weed. No warrant, no probable cause, just suspicion. They tore his car apart, found nothing, still booked him for resisting. She glanced. Around the panel, I had to cross-examine that officer, knowing full well the judge had sided with police in his last 14 cases. But I got the timeline to crack. His own body cam contradicted his report. The civil rights professor beside her started scribbling notes. The retired police chief tapped his finger against the armrest. Suddenly, very aware of the silence around him, Reggie walked out of that courtroom free. Jasmine continued. But his record still showed an arrest. Took 6 months to get it expunged. That's the kind of damage this system does. She wasn't finished. And since we're trading credentials, let's remember when I practiced, I didn't have a TV crew or an editing room. Just bad lighting, overworked defenders, and scared kids. The moderator hesitated, hand hovering over her notes, unsure whether to move on or let it ride. Judge Mathis leaned back in his chair, arms folded. His smile was gone. "You're passionate," he said quietly. "I'm accurate." Jasmine replied. Someone in the front row clapped. Then again and again. It wasn't a burst of applause, it was a build. This time, it wasn't polite. It was earned. Mathis shifted in his seat. "Well," he said, voice harder now, "we'll see how deep that accuracy runs when we talk precedent." Next, the moderator tried to steer things, but Jasmine looked straight at Mathis, not the crowd. "I welcome it. Because when you use precedent to justify harm, all you're doing is hiding behind old wounds." Then she turned to the panel. "Let's stop talking about these cases like chess moves. These are lives." But Mathis wasn't done. He still had a card to play. The moderator shuffled in her seat, trying to regain control. But the room had already shifted. The polite exchange was over. This was something else, now something charged. A standoff. And the silence wasn't quiet. It was electric. Judge Mathis leaned into his mic again, this time slower, deliberate. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said. "I'll admit your courtroom resume is more than I expected. But let's be real. You're in Washington now. Suits, soundbites, subcommittees. How often do you still think like a defense attorney?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, like she was weighing the question. "Every single day," she answered. "Because I represent people, not just policies." Mathis smirked. "Politics isn't the courtroom." "No," Jasmine said, "but it should still answer to the truth." That line didn't draw applause. It didn't need to. It landed. The retired police chief shifted again, uncomfortable. The professor next to her gave Jasmine a quiet glance. Something like reevaluation. The moderator looked down at her cards, saw the next question was about public trust, and set it aside. "Congresswoman," she said, "you've mentioned your experience with faulty searches. Could you walk us through a case that changed how you see justice?" Jasmine exhaled softly, like she'd been waiting for that one. She took a sip of water, looked into the camera. "I had a client in Fresno, young mother 24. Her name was Renee. She had a 3-year-old daughter and worked 2 jobs. She let that sit for a beat. One day, she got pulled over for a broken taillight. Cop said her eyes looked glassy, said she seemed nervous, told her to step out." Jasmine's voice stayed even, but the weight of it deepened. "They searched her car. No warrant, no consent. Found an old prescription bottle. The bottle had her cousin's name on it," Jasmine said. "Didn't matter. They charged her with possession. Took her daughter for 72 hours. A soft dam broke from somewhere in the audience. Renee didn't even understand what was happening," Jasmine continued. "She just kept asking, 'Can I call my mom? She's at the daycare.' She leaned in, her voice firmer now. 'I got the charges dropped in 4 days.' But those 4 days wrecked her life. She missed work. Her boss cut her hours. Her landlord left a notice about disruptive activity. She scanned the panel, all from a bogus stop and a bottle that wasn't even hers. Then she looked at Mathis again. 'So yeah, I still think like a defense attorney, because bad law leaves scars.'" Mathis didn't interrupt. He shifted not to counter, but to listen. The silence that settled wasn't dead air. It was the silence of people processing something real. "I watched that woman sob in a courthouse hallway," Jasmine said quietly, "because she didn't know if her daughter would remember her face." She paused. "I've seen the damage, not just in the moment, but long after the charges are dropped." Mathis rubbed his jaw. No quip this time. The moderator leaned forward, voice gentler now. "What did that case teach you?" Jasmine didn't miss a beat. That even temporary injustice has permanent consequences. A man in the second row stood up silently, then sat again. Jasmine clocked it, but didn't react. She was in her zone now. This wasn't performance. It was memory. Finally, Mathis spoke. "That's a heavy burden," he said. "But how do we balance that with officer safety?" Jasmine gave a slow nod. "That's a fair question, Judge. But I'll say this: safety and accountability aren't opposites. They're part of the same promise." She leaned forward. "The badge comes with power. But power without oversight becomes a threat, not a shield." The professor beside her murmured, "That's real." Jasmine turned back to Mathis, and "I've never met a good cop who feared accountability. The only ones who do are the ones who shouldn't be wearing the badge in the first place." This time, the applause wasn't hesitant. It started small, but held. Mathis didn't interrupt. Not now. But respect isn't the same as surrender, and he wasn't done. He leaned back. Arms crossed again, but his posture had shifted. No theatrics. Now, just calculation. He tapped his index finger on the table, slow and steady. "You're a storyteller, Jasmine. I'll give you that, but let's talk real stakes." His voice was cooler, tighter. "Let's say your client's up against an officer with a clean record. No bias, no footage, no contradictions. Just your client's word against his. What then?" It was a trap. No evidence, no leverage. Just the gray space where truth gets crushed by doubt. Jasmine didn't blink. "I've been there," she said. Then she turned slightly, facing the crowd more than the panel. There was a case out of Springfield, Missouri. Small courtroom. Tension. My client, Terrence Bell, 23 years old, pulled over outside a gas station. Taillight flickered. She let the words fall deliberately. Officer said Terrence's hands were near his waistband. Said he looked like he was about to run. That was the probable cause. Mathis raised an eyebrow, but stayed quiet. They searched him. Found a folding knife in his pocket. Legal length, closed. Charged him with intent to use a weapon, said his body language was aggressive. She gave a dry, knowing chuckle. I spent 37 minutes crossing that officer. Asked him to define aggressive posture. Asked him to cite where that definition lived in his department's manual. She let the silence build again. He couldn't. She leaned back, not triumphant, just clear. Then I requested his training records. Buried in them was a disciplinary note from 2 years earlier, where he'd used the exact same phrase to justify another questionable stop. That case had been tossed too. A few quiet gasps from the audience. That's how I got the jury. To see it, no footage, no flair, just patterns. Because patterns reveal intent. And now the room went still, not out of awe, but understanding. Mathis rubbed his chin. You're saying you found all that without a paralegal? Jasmine nodded. Late nights, microwave dinners. Public records requests. That's the job. She paused. That's what public defenders do. No glam, just grit. Someone in the audience murmured, that's real work. Another added, facts. She looked back at Mathis, steady. You asked what I do when it's just me and my client's word? She nodded once. I make sure the truth speaks louder than both of us. For the first time, Mathis didn't fire back. Not because he couldn't, but because he knew he'd been outmaneuvered, and in front of a live audience that stung more than he'd expected. After a beat, he gave a small shrug, trying to recover. All right, he said. I'll give you credit for that one. Jasmine didn't smile. She wasn't here for credit. She turned slightly toward the crowd. I don't tell these stories for applause. I tell them because they happen every day, and most days there's no mic, no camera, no panel. Just someone praying their voice gets heard before the system shuts them out. The moderator stepped in gently. You said earlier that temporary injustice has permanent consequences. Can you say more about that? Jasmine nodded slowly. Terrence didn't just beat the charge, but when he applied for a job 2 months later, the employer pulled his arrest for court haven. Though it had been cleared, she gave the room a moment to absorb that. He lost the offer. Took him nearly a year to find stable work. And the officer. She looked around. Still on patrol. Still writing aggressive posture into reports. No discipline. No retraining. This time, the audience didn't gasp. They growled. Anger, low and real, moved through the room. Mathis exhaled through his nose. All right, he muttered. You've made your point. But Jasmine shook her head. Not yet. She leaned forward. Because if that same officer pulls over a kid tomorrow and writes the same report, we'll be right back here. Debating language, debating impact, while someone else loses their shot at a future. She folded her notes, hadn't looked at them once. I don't want panels. I want prevention. She knew the next exchange would get personal. She could see it in Mathis's eyes, the way he stared at her without blinking, like he was waiting for her to crack. But she didn't. With each word, she was gaining ground. The moderator fumbled slightly with her cards, hand trembling just a little. Let's move to our next topic, racial profiling and the Fourth Amendment. Particularly, how precedent can function as both a shield and a sword. Mathis sat up straighter. Now, this is my lane. The crowd perked up. His voice, polished and confident, had kept him on television for years. You see, he began, when we talk about precedent, we're talking about rulings that protect officers from being judged in hindsight. If a cop follows protocol-based on precedent, you can't punish them just because someone doesn't like the outcome. That's the law. He looked pointedly at Jasmine. Unless, of course, Congresswoman Crockett wants to toss out 40 years of settled caseland make. Every traffic stop, a trial. The bait was obvious. So was the challenge. Jasmine didn't bite. "I'm not interested in throwing out precedent," she said evenly. "I'm interested in examining it, holding it to the same standard we ask of people. If it causes harm, we reconsider. That's not rebellion. That's evolution." Mathis chuckled, leaning back. "Evolution, huh?" Jasmine faced him fully now. "Take Ren v. United States, 1996, she said. Officers used a minor traffic infraction as a pretext to stop a car and conduct a drug search. The court ruled it constitutional as long as the stop itself was legal, even if the real motive was something else. She turned to the crowd. That ruling has been used for decades to justify stops based on suspicion, gut instinct, bias, whatever you want to call it. And that suspicion disproportionately targets black and brown drivers. Mathis squinted. That's the law. You're a congresswoman now. You can try to change it. But don't blame the officers following it. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, letting her frustration flicker through. And I do try to change it. I introduce bills to undo the damage. But law takes time. And while we wait, people lose jobs, freedom, lives. You want accountability. She looked out over the crowd. Then let's be honest about who the law protects and who it leaves behind. Someone stood and clapped. Then another. Not a wave, just a ripple. Enough to feel real. No. The retired police chief cleared his throat. It was the first time he'd moved in minutes. "If I may," he said. His voice was dry but measured. "The problem isn't just the law. It's discretion." He looked across the panel. Officers are trained to act first, justify later. And when precedent gives them that space, bad habits get legal protection. He turned slightly toward Jasmine. Not agreement, but recognition. Mathis blinked. "You agree with her?" Chief shrugged. "I've led officers. I've had to discipline some. What she's saying isn't wrong. Precedent is real. But so is the abuse of it." The moderator, clearly relieved, jumped in. "So what we're saying is precedent needs re-examination, not removal." Jasmine leaned in. "Exactly. Would you like to continue from here?" "Exactly," Jasmine said. "And let's not forget precedent once upheld slavery. It upheld segregation." She paused, letting the weight of history settle in the room. Just because something's been ruled doesn't make it right. Laws are alive. They're supposed to serve people, not trap them. Matthews gave a slow, almost reluctant nod. "You make a strong argument." No sarcasm, no smirk, just truth. For the first time since the panel began, the dynamic shifted. Jasmine wasn't defending her place anymore. Matthews was rethinking his own. But she knew better than to mistake respect for progress. Applause doesn't move systems. And someone in the room was about to remind them why they were really here. A silence stretched. Then a voice, gravelly but steady, rose from the back row. "My nephew got stopped in Stockton last year," the man said. Same excuse, aggressive driving. Heads turned. He was on his way to work. Food warehouse shift. They said he reached too fast for his glove box, pulled him out, slammed him on the ground. No ticket, no apology. The man stood, arms folded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Where does he go to get that back? No one spoke. No one could. It wasn't a question that wanted a polished answer. It was the kind of truth people carry for years before saying out loud. Jasmine turned toward him. Her voice even. "He probably can't," she said. And that's the problem. She let it sit. The damage is done before the paperwork even reaches a desk. The man nodded slowly and sat. No applause followed. It wasn't that kind of moment. The moderator let the silence breathe before turning back to Jasmine. You've said harm often happens before the system catches up. So what does accountability look like to you? Jasmine leaned forward, hands clasped. Accountability means we stop pretending that legal and just are always the same thing. The law gives officers enormous power, but rarely punishes its abuse. That's not a flaw. That's how it was built. She paused. We keep calling it broken, but maybe it's not broken at all. Maybe it's just working exactly as it was designed to. Matthews cut in, voice low. You saying the whole system's corrupt? She looked at him, not angry, not smug, just clear. I'm saying the system is consistent. Consistently protective of power. Inconsistently protective of people. The professor next to her let out a quiet breath. She's not wrong. Jasmine continued. In court, I've seen how a name, an address, or even a hairstyle can change everything. I've watched prosecutors call teenage boys men just to increase the charges. I've seen judges look at public defenders like they're wasting time. Her voice stayed calm, but the words cut sharper. And when I walk in black, woman? Not a soft voice, not a familiar name, they assume I'm decoration. Until I start speaking. The room held still. Matthews looked away, chewing his cheek. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The silence was doing its own work. The moderator leaned forward. Congresswoman, if you could change one thing tomorrow, just one, what would it be? Jasmine didn't blink. Qualified immunity. The retired chief beside her sat up straighter. It's the shield, she said. It lets misconduct go unanswered. It tells victims that even when they're right, they still won't see justice. It keeps bad officers on the street-tan drives. Good ones into silence. Matthews shook his head, slightly nod in dismissal, but like someone digesting something hard. That's a big move, he said. You think that solves everything? No, she replied. But it sends a message that justice isn't reserved for the powerful, that people matter more than precedent. She let the words hang, because until the law fears the people as much as the people fear the law, it's not balanced. It's tilted, and we all feel it, even when we pretend we don't. That was at the shift. Even those who had doubted her earlier now sat motionless, listening. The energy wasn't defensive anymore. It was honest. Real Mathis looked at the moderator. Can I say something? She nodded. He turned to Jasmine. When we started, thought you'd be all sound bites and headlines, but you showed something else. He nodded once, slow. You showed heart. And real courtroom muscle. Jasmine didn't gloat. She just gave a small, respectful nod. But Matthews wasn't done. I still don't agree with everything you said, he added. But I respect how you said it, and you got folks thinking that matters. Jasmine met. His gaze, calm and direct. I don't need agreement, she said. I need awareness. That's where change starts. The room was settling into that reflection when a voice from the front row brought the conversation to a deeper, more personal place. A woman, probably in her late 50s, raised her hand not for attention, but out of quiet respect. Her voice was calm, slightly raspy. Can I ask something? The moderator nodded for her to continue. My son's locked up in Toledo, she said. Caught up in something dumb. Wrong place, wrong time. He didn't hurt anyone, but he took the plea. Said he didn't trust the system. Said he just wanted it over with. She paused, eyes wet but steady. You ever regret telling someone to fight when they were just too tired to do it? The question dropped like a weight. Even Jasmine took a moment. Yes, she said softly. More than once. You could have heard a pin drop. I had a young client, she continued. First offense. They offered him a plea. 18 months. Probation. No jail, but he'd have to admit to a felony. She took a breath. He was terrified. His mom begged him to fight it. but he didn't want to gamble. He didn't trust what could happen if we lost. She looked out across the room. We fought anyway. Not because I pushed him, but because I promised him I'd stand with him the whole way. I told him, if we lose, I'll be right there when the verdict comes down. Matthews leaned in, listening now not to respond, but to hear. We won, Jasmine said. Got the case thrown out. But I lost sleep wondering if I had pushed too hard too soon. Even when you win, that kind of fear stays with you. The woman in the front row nodded, wiping a cheek without shame. That's why I speak the way I do, Jasmine added. Because people like your son, they don't make decisions freely. They make them scared. Matthews gently shifted the moment. Can I ask you something, Congresswoman? His voice was low, without edge. Have you ever lost a case that still haunts you? Jasmine turned to him. Her expression didn't change, but her voice dipped. Yeah, his name was Malik Foster. The room seemed to still even further. He was 17. Caught outside a parked car with 3 friends in Mobile, Alabama. He didn't touch anything. He was the lookout. She let that hang a moment, but the DA wanted to try him as an adult because of a trespassing charge from a year before. Said he was a repeat offender. I argued he was just a scared kid trying to fit in. She looked down. They gave him 6 years. A beat passed. Then another. He called me from prison a month later and said, Miss Crockett, I should have just walked away that night. Her voice softened to almost a whisper. I still hear that. When I'm alone, when I'm writing legislation, when I walk into rooms like this, even Matthews sat back, clearly moved. And that's why I keep showing up, she said, voice steady again. Because someone has to carry the stories of those who couldn't carry their own. The professor beside her spoke for the first time since the panel began. You're not just a voice, he said quietly. You're a ledger. You carry names, and that's rare. Jasmine nodded. She didn't linger in the compliment. Matthews cleared his throat. You came in here like a politician, he said. But you've shown us you're still a lawyer. Eh? Few chuckles rose. I'll admit, he continued, I came at you a little sideways. More laughter light, but real. Let me return the favor. He leaned into the mic. There was an episode of my show years ago. Young man wrongly accused of stealing his cousin's car. His public defender didn't even know the case. The kid looked at me and said, I didn't do it. But nobody cares. Matthews looked at Jasmine, eyes steady. I care. That's why I sit in this chair. But maybe I forgot what it feels like to fight from the ground. Jasmine gave a slow nod. That ground's still there, she said. Still waiting for someone to speak up for it? The moment landed with quiet weight, but the mood had shifted. The audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were leaning in, ready for more than understanding. Ready to be challenged. It started small, a few hands clapping somewhere in the middle rows. Then more joined. Louder, intentional. By the time it reached the sides of the auditorium, it wasn't polite applause anymore. It was real, sustained. Jasmine didn't gesture for it. Didn't scan the room for approval. She simply folded her hands on the table and waited. Judge Mathis glanced at the moderator. Then at Jasmine. There was no sarcasm in his eyes now, only curiosity, and maybe a little regret. When the applause, finally quieted, he leaned back toward the mic and said, I wasn't expecting to get schooled today. He said it with a dry smile. But here we are. This time, the laughter from the audience was genuine. It's not polite. Jasmine met his gaze not with smugness, but with a calm, quiet confidence. You weren't schooled, she said. You were. Reminded, Mathis let that sit. Then gave a single nod. Fair enough. Sensing the moment had matured, the moderator shifted gears. Let's talk impact, Congresswoman. What would you say to the young people watching those who feel overlooked, dismissed, like their truth doesn't matter? Jasmine leaned forward, voice steady, but there was something raw beneath the surface now. I'd say this: you don't need permission to be heard. You don't need someone in a suit to validate your pain. If you've been profiled, misjudged, ignored, your experience is real. She paused, letting the weight land. You don't have to turn it into a speech. But if you can speak, speak. Because silence lets the system sleep comfortably. The room was still. No phones, no fidgeting. Everyone was listening now. I've sat in courtrooms where the truth didn't matter until someone forced it to. I've seen how fast a young person's story can be rewritten by a bad report or a bored judge. But if you show up again and again, and you learn the law, and you carry your people with you eventually, even the ones who ignored you will have to listen. Matthews leaned back slightly, reflective. And what about the ones who don't listen? The ones who double down? Jasmine turned to him. Then we outlast them. We outwork them. We keep showing up until the silence is too loud to ignore. The retired police chief, quiet until now, finally spoke. I've worked in the system 30 years, he said slowly. And I'll be honest, I don't always like hearing what you say. But I respect how you say it. And I see now how often. The system's protected people like me. That has to change. It wasn't a grand confession, but it was honest. And it landed with weight. From the audience, a young woman called out, clear and proud. This is the conversation we've been waiting for? Applause rippled through the room again. The moderator smiled. Before we close, any final words from the panelists? Mathis leaned toward his mic. I came in here thinking I was the most experienced voice on this stage, but I'm leaving. Knowing experience isn't just about years or titles, it's about who you've stood up for. He turned to Jasmine. I tried to test you, and you passed every single one. Jasmine nodded once, then looked back out at the crowd. I didn't come here to pass, she said. I came here because I'm tired of watching people drown in laws that were never written to protect them. She paused. I came here because someone has to say it plain. Justice should feel like relief, not like survival. The final applause didn't explode. It rose slowly, steadily. Some people stood, some whistled. Others just clapped with quiet intensity. But none of it was for show. It was real. Even Matthews stood and clapped just a few times, enough to mean it. Because at that point, there was nothing left to argue. Backstage, the light dimmed. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and warm cables. Folding chairs lined the wall. Jasmine had just stepped behind the curtain when a woman in jeans and sneakers rushed toward her, clipboard in hand and a headset around her neck. Congresswoman Crockett. Jasmine turned. Yes, I'm Angela. With the production team. Sue is still a little breathless, clearly still processing the energy from the room. Listen, Judge Mathis wants to speak with you. Privately, if you're open to it. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. He does. Angela nodded. He's in the green room, asked specifically. Said he didn't get to finish what he wanted to say. Jasmine hesitated, but only for a moment, then nodded. All right. Angela led her down a quiet hallway that wrapped around the back of the auditorium. The crowd's noise was muffled, now clapping, voices. The occasional creak of a door swinging shut. They stopped at a plain white door. A handwritten sign taped to it. Judge Mathis, green room. Angela knocked once, then opened the door a crack. She's here. Inside, Mathis stood by a folding table, pouring water from a plastic pitcher. No cameras, no microphones. No performance, just to people who'd spent the last hour in verbal combat. He turned and gave a small nod. Thanks for coming back here. Jasmine stepped in, staying just inside the doorway. You said you had more to say? Mathis took a sip of water, then placed the cup down with both hands. Yeah, I owe you more than a half-hearted compliment. In front of a crowd, she didn't speak, just waited. I came in today with my own assumptions, he said. Figured you'd come in here to grandstand. Say your piece, take the applause, and head back to D.C. You didn't do that, Mathis said, his voice quieter now. Jasmine tilted her head. You thought I was just here to play politics. He gave a dry chuckle. Didn't just think it, I was ready to call it out. But you didn't fold. You taught. You listened. You hit back hard and never faked a thing. That caught me off guard. She stepped a little closer. So why ask me back here? You already said your piece. Mathis nodded, slower this time. Because I needed to ask something off camera. When you spoke about Terrence Malick, Renee, it hit deeper than I expected. Made me wonder, what do you do with all of that? When you go home. Jasmine exhaled. I carry it. Some nights, it's light. Some nights, it keeps me up. But I'd rather carry it than pretend it's not real. Mathis looked down. I used to feel that too. Back in juvenile court, I'd see kids whose lives were already written off before they even stood before a judge. But then the cameras came. And I guess over time, I got comfortable. She didn't scold him or offer comfort. Just said, plain and steady. Then, maybe this was your reminder too. That landed. Mathis sank into a chair, not from age, but from the weight of something returning. I'm not trying to be the villain, he said quietly. I know, Jasmine replied, but you don't have to be one to still be part of the problem. He looked up. You think it's too late for me to change? No, she said. But it is too late to keep pretending everything's fine. He studied his hands for a beat. Would you ever consider coming back? Maybe something broader, bring in the community, the law, the policy people, a real event. She crossed. Her arms measured. You mean a round two? He smirked. Let's call it a continuation. She nodded, but didn't agree yet. I'll think about it. But if I come back, it has to be real. No stagecraft. No polish. Real problems. Real solutions. He stood and offered his hand. Deal. She shook it not as equals in title or power, but as two people who, for the first time, actually saw each other. But as Jasmine stepped out of the green room, her phone buzzed. The fight wasn't over. It had just come home. The hallway was mostly empty now. Folding chairs stacked banners down, the echo of conversation fading. A janitor nodded. As she passed, broom in hand, Jasmine reached into her blazer and checked her phone. A text from her cousin Tiana. They pulled me over again. Said I didn't stop at the sign. I did. Jasmine stared at the message, her body still, but her thoughts racing. This wasn't a panel. This wasn't theory. This was family. She tapped to call. Tiana picked up instantly. Hey, Jasmine said softly. You okay? A sniffle on the other end. Yeah, just scared. He kept asking why I was nervous. Said I had to be hiding something. Did he give you a ticket? No, just stared at my ID forever. Then said I was lucky and let me go. Jasmine clenched her jaw. You're not lucky. You're targeted. Not I'm sorry. A beat of silence. I didn't even do anything wrong, Tiana whispered. I know, Jasmine said. You never have to prove your innocence. Tiana's breathing steadied. What should I do next time? Call me, Jasmine replied, and keep your camera running. They stayed on the line for a while longer. Jasmine didn't rush her. She just listened. The kind of listening courts rarely gave. When the call ended, she stood alone in the hallway, staring down at the darkened screen. This was what it had always been about. Not sound bites, not applause. Real people, living the weight of systems too slow to change. Angela, The stage manager passed by with a box of mic packs. She paused. "You okay?" she asked. Jasmine nodded. "Just reminded why I do this." Angela smiled. "You shifted something tonight." You could feel it. "Maybe," Jasmine said. "But change only sticks when it's repeated. Again and again." Angela walked off. Jasmine made her way to the exit. Outside, evening had settled. Streetlights buzzed to life. A few people still lingered in the lot, quietly talking as she stepped. Through the doors, a young woman caught her arm mid-20s. Denim jacket, long braids, a small notepad clutched in one hand. "I just wanted to say," she began, voice shaking slightly. "I'm in pre-law at Fresno State. I was thinking about switching majors, didn't think I'd ever be taken seriously. But after tonight, I think I just found my reason to stay." Jasmine met her gaze. "Then stay. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. We need you in the room." The young woman smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for being real." Jasmine squeezed her shoulder gently, then kept walking. No music, no spotlight. Just the sound of her heels on concrete and a quiet, steady pulse in her chest. She got in her car, closed the door, and sat for a moment. The road ahead wasn't clear, it never was. But for the first time in a while, it felt like someone might finally be listening. Not because she'd spoken loud enough, but because she'd spoken long enough. Real change doesn't come from silence. It comes from persistence.